In the 1980s and 90s, New Age aesthetics crept out of the fringes and into the center of middle-class society. People gathered in public parks for energy rituals, crystals appeared on office desks, and ancient mysticism became a major commercial force. Universities hosted Fritjof Capra, global politicians cited his book The Turning Point, and the intellectual elite revered him as a spiritual leader bringing essential guidance to a doomed planet. But the Brazilian philosopher Olavo de Carvalho examined Capra's work and offered a devastating summary. He called it LANA CAPRINA, a Latin expression meaning worthless goat's wool. Carvalho's critique is methodical. He demonstrates that Capra's celebrated esoteric wisdom is actually built on poor historical research, elementary mistranslations of Eastern texts, and fabricated Western timelines. The complete lack of elementary research in Capra's work leads to a staggering contradiction. For decades, thousands of respected intellectuals looked at these fundamental errors and chose to applaud them as a milestone in human thought. Capra's philosophy rests on a specific claim. Western culture is trapped in a dominating, rational, patriarchal state, what he calls yang. To survive, he argues, humanity must embrace the passive, intuitive, feminine yin state of ancient Chinese philosophy. There is a glaring historical contradiction here. The I Ching, the ancient Chinese divination text Capra cites to support his anti-patriarchal stance, explicitly instructs wives to obey the lord of the household. The actual Chinese feudal system Capra idolizes rested on rigid masculine authority. Capra distorts the ancient Chinese triad, heaven above, earth below, and man in the middle. The Tao, or straight path, rejects his idea that man passively dissolves into earth. Instead, one aligns with heaven to actively govern the earthly layer, demanding strict moral hierarchy. Capra stripped away this rigorous divine discipline. He deleted heaven from the equation to sell Western audiences an intellectually passive version of integration that requires zero moral effort. To sell a cure, you need a disease. Capra's second claim is that a unified paradigm of mechanicalism, scientism, and social Darwinism has oppressed Western culture for many hundreds of years. Social Darwinism, the application of evolutionary competition to human economies, is barely a century old. It emerged as a sociological concept decades after Charles Darwin published his original biological theories. Scientism, the belief that only physical sciences yield valid knowledge, did not formally appear until the late 19th and early 20th centuries. It faced immediate, widespread rejection by major philosophical schools like phenomenology, a movement dedicated to studying the structures of conscious experience. Mechanicalism, the view of the universe as a machine, dates back to the 17th century and figures like Isaac Newton, but it was never universally dominant. It was constantly thought by opposing philosophers and eventually dismantled by modern quantum physics. Capra constructed a historical strawman. He stitched together distinct, contested ideas into a fake, cohesive timeline of enemies to make his New Age philosophy appear as a unique savior. Carvalho looks at the broader history of ideas to explain Capra's popularity. Capra's philosophy arose to replace the dominant trend of the time, the cultural Marxism formulated by Antonio Gramsci. This Marxist ideology had a Promethean goal. It was driven by a desire to completely conquer and transform the natural world to serve human history. Capra reacted to this aggressive conquering by offering the opposite extreme. He proposed a total passive surrender to nature, asking individuals to melt their consciousness into a vague, holistic soup. Carvalho diagnoses this as a destructive regression to the womb. The mind seeks to obliterate its own agency and retreat from its moral responsibilities. By stripping away the requirement to align with any higher moral or rational order, this passive surrender leaves humanity defenseless against the dark forces of its own basest passions. Capra's success relied on a mastery of timing. He delivered the exact absolution an exhausted audience was desperate to hear. The intellectual class was stunned by the historical faults of their own attempts to dominate the globe. They were desperate for a way to relieve their cultural guilt. But instead of honest, rigorous self-correction, these intellectuals opted for a mocking conversion. They abandoned critical thought and embraced a comforting, effortless mysticism. This is the lasting danger of Capra's movement. It successfully normalized an aggressive anti-intellectualism by masking it as deep self-knowledge. When a culture becomes desperate for emotional relief, it will eagerly embrace a false prophet's worthless goat's wool and revere it as ultimate wisdom.